Step away from her now. The command cut through the late afternoon air like something heavier than sound, something that made conversations stall mid-sentence and footsteps hesitate on the concrete sidewalk. But the agents didn't step back, not even an inch. The bus doors were still open behind them, engine idling low, heat shimmering off the asphalt in soft waves as Ava Johnson stood at the edge of the curb, her wrist held just a second too firmly by a gloved hand that assumed control without question. People had gathered in that quiet, uncertain way strangers do when something feels off but not yet understood, a half-circle of eyes and phones and silence forming under the pale sun. "Ma'am, you need to comply," one of the agents said, voice measured, rehearsed, like he had said those words 1,000 times before and never expected resistance. Not from someone like her. Ava didn't look at him. Not yet. Her gaze had shifted somewhere else entirely, somewhere smaller, lower, just behind the line of uniforms. A little girl clutching a worn backpack, frozen in place, her knuckles pale around the straps. The sound of the city seemed to pull back, traffic fading into a distant hum, a siren somewhere blocks away stretching thin across the air like a warning no one here was listening to. Ava's breathing stayed even, slow, controlled, the kind of stillness that didn't match the tension tightening around her. The agent's grip adjusted, firmer now, as if sensing something he couldn't name. "Papers," another voice said, sharper this time, impatience creeping in, authority leaning forward. The word hung there, heavy, final, like it was supposed to end the moment. It didn't. Ava shifted her weight just slightly, a subtle movement most people wouldn't notice, but enough to change the way she stood, the way her shoulders aligned, the way her feet found the ground beneath her like they'd done it 1,000 times before. The little girl took a small step forward without realizing it, drawn by something she couldn't explain, and Ava's head turned just enough for their eyes to meet. For a fraction of a second, everything softened. "It's okay," Ava said quietly, her voice low but steady, not directed at the agents, not even at the crowd, just at the child. "Stay right there." The words didn't rise above the tension. They moved through it, calm and certain, like they belonged somewhere deeper than fear. One of the agents let out a short breath, almost a laugh, shaking his head as if the moment had already been decided. "You think you're in charge here?" he said, the edge in his tone sharpening, drawing a few murmurs from the onlookers. Phones lifted higher. Someone whispered. Someone else stepped back. The bus driver leaned out of the window, watching but saying nothing. Ava's hand relaxed at her side, fingers loosening, then settling again, not in surrender but in readiness that didn't announce itself. A faint breeze moved through the street, lifting a strand of her hair, brushing against the metal side of the bus with a soft, hollow sound. The world didn't feel loud anymore. It felt focused. The agent closest to her shifted his stance, just slightly off balance without realizing it. His attention split between the crowd and the moment slipping out of his control. Ava finally looked at him then, really looked, her expression calm, unreadable, almost gentle. "You're making a mistake," she said, not loud, not forceful, but certain in a way that didn't need volume to be heard. The words didn't challenge him, they defined something. Around them, the silence deepened, not empty but waiting, as if the street itself had paused to see what would happen next. And for the first time, the agent hesitated. Ava did not move when he hesitated, and that was the first thing that unsettled him, not defiance, not resistance, but the absence of both, the way she stood there as if the moment did not belong to him at all, as if the authority in his voice had missed its mark and landed somewhere behind her. The late afternoon sun slid lower between the buildings, casting long shadows across the sidewalk, stretching the outlines of uniforms and faces into something distorted and uncertain. A car rolled slowly past, its driver turning his head just long enough to catch the scene before disappearing into traffic, another witness who would carry only a fragment of what was unfolding. "You need to answer me," the agent said again, tightening his posture, reclaiming his tone, but there was a fraction of doubt now, a thin crack beneath the surface that he could not quite cover. Ava's eyes shifted once more, not to the agent, but across the street, scanning without urgency, taking in exits, distances, the rhythm of movement around them, the quiet patterns most people never noticed. A delivery truck idled at the corner. A pedestrian light blinked down from 5 to 4. A man in a gray hoodie paused mid-step, uncertain whether to keep walking or stay and watch. Every detail settled into place around her, not as noise, but as structure. "Ma'am." Another agent stepped closer, his voice lower, less certain than before. "This can go easier if you cooperate." The word easier hung awkwardly in the air, as if it no longer meant what it was supposed to mean. Ava let out a slow breath, the kind that carried memory in it. Not fear, not panic, but something practiced, something measured over time and repetition. Her hands remained visible, relaxed, fingers slightly curved, not clenched, not raised, simply present. The little girl behind the agents shifted again, her shoes scraping softly against the pavement, the sound small but sharp in the quiet. Ava heard it. She always heard the smallest things. "You are scaring her," Ava said, her voice still calm. But now there was something else beneath it, not accusation, not anger, just a statement that reframed the moment in a way the agents had not considered. One of them glanced back, just for a second, following her gaze. And in that second, something changed. The crowd was no longer just a backdrop. It was watching. It was judging. It was remembering. The agent who had been holding her wrist loosened his grip without realizing it. Not fully, but enough for the tension to shift. Ava did not pull away. She did not need to. "This is procedure," the first agent replied, but his voice had lost its sharp edge, the certainty diluted by something he could not name. Procedure. The word felt smaller now, thinner, like it did not fully fit the situation anymore. Ava tilted her head, just slightly. Her eyes steady on him now, and for the first time he saw something he had missed before, not fear, not anger, but awareness, deep and controlled, like someone who had already mapped the outcome before the first word was spoken. "Procedure should protect people," she said quietly, each word clear, deliberate, carrying weight without force. "Not make them afraid to stand still." The breeze moved again, carrying the faint scent of asphalt and heat, rustling a loose flyer taped to a nearby pole, its edges flapping softly, an ordinary sound in an ordinary place that no longer felt ordinary. The agent's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in conflict, his training pulling one way, the moment pulling another. Behind him, the little girl took one more step forward, her hand reaching out instinctively, not toward the agents, but toward Ava, as if she had already decided who was safe. And in that quiet, suspended space between command and consequence, Ava did not step back. She did not step forward. She simply held her ground, and the entire street seemed to lean toward her, waiting. Agent Mark Reynolds had built his entire career on moments like this, moments where hesitation did not exist, where authority was not questioned, where people complied before he had to ask twice. And yet standing there now, with the late sun cutting across the street and a circle of strangers watching too closely, he felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not fear, not quite, but resistance, not from her actions, but from her presence. He adjusted his stance, squaring his shoulders as if posture alone could restore control, the polished badge on his vest catching a thin line of light as he stepped forward half a pace, reclaiming space that had somehow shifted without permission. "You are not in a position to tell us what procedure is," he said, his voice steadier now, deliberate, projecting outward for the crowd as much as for her, reminding everyone who held authority here. A few heads nodded instinctively, the weight of uniform and title still carrying influence, still shaping perception, but it did not land the same way it usually did. Ava watched him, not confrontational, not submissive, simply present in a way that refused to shrink. Behind her calm expression, something measured continued, quiet calculations threading through each second, the timing of the light changing from red to green at the intersection, the shift of a shadow from a passing cloud, the subtle repositioning of the second agent who now stood slightly to her right, instead of directly in front of her. None of it looked important. All of it was. Reynolds followed her gaze for a brief moment, noticing nothing, and that unsettled him more than anything else, the sense that something was happening just outside his awareness. "We asked for identification," he continued, his tone sharpening again, reaching for the certainty he knew, "and you have refused to provide it." Ava did not immediately respond. Instead, her eyes moved once more, briefly, toward the bus, toward the open door still waiting, the driver's hand resting on the wheel, unmoving, watching, then back to Reynolds. "I did not refuse," she said quietly. "You did not ask. You assumed." The distinction landed harder than it should have, cutting clean through the structure he had built in his mind. A murmur moved through the crowd, soft but noticeable, a shift in tone, in alignment, people no longer just observing, but processing, comparing what they were seeing with what they expected to see. One of the agents cleared his throat, adjusting his grip on the radio clipped to his vest, glancing at Reynolds for direction that did not come immediately. That delay, that single second of uncertainty, stretched longer than it should have. Reynolds felt it. He stepped closer, closing the space, lowering his voice slightly, as if proximity would reassert control. "Listen carefully," he said, his words measured, controlled. "We are giving you a chance to resolve this right here." Ava met his eyes fully now, and for the first time he saw something deeper than calm, something grounded, steady, like a foundation that had been tested before and had not moved. "No," she said, just one word, not loud, not aggressive, but absolute in a way that stopped the moment cold. Not defiance, not refusal, a boundary. The air seemed to tighten around them, the breeze fading, the distant sounds of traffic dimming again, as if the world itself was narrowing to this single exchange. The little girl behind the agents stepped closer still, her small hand now brushing against the fabric of Ava's sleeve, seeking something she trusted without understanding why. Ava did not look down, but her posture shifted just enough to place herself between the child and the agents, subtle, almost invisible, but deliberate. Reynolds noticed that. His eyes flicked to the child, then back to Ava, and something in his expression changed, not fully, not yet, but enough to create a fracture in the certainty he had carried into this moment. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," he said, though the words lacked the conviction they once had. Ava's response came without pause. "No," she said again, just as calm, just as steady. "You are." And in that instant, the balance shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but undeniably, like a scale tipping just enough that it would never return to where it had been before. Reynolds felt the shift before he could explain it, like the ground beneath the moment had tilted just enough to throw off everything he trusted, and that made him react the only way he knew how, by tightening control where he still could. His hand moved slightly, not forceful, but assertive, guiding the space again, re-establishing lines that had blurred. "Step away from her," he said to the child without looking. His voice clipped, controlled, but it carried less authority than before, like it had to work harder to be heard. The little girl did not move. Her fingers stayed curled into the fabric of Ava's sleeve, small, steady, unwilling to let go of the one thing that felt certain in a moment that no longer made sense. Ava did not pull away from her either. She simply adjusted, a half step that placed her fully between the agents and the child, her posture still calm, still open, but now unmistakably protective. The motion was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention, but Reynolds saw it, and something about it unsettled him more than open resistance would have. It was not a reaction. It was a decision. "This is not your concern," one of the other agents said, trying to regain ground, his voice slightly raised now, projecting outward again, reaching for the crowd, for validation, for structure. A few people shifted, uncertain, the weight of authority still pressing against instinct, still trying to define what was right in front of them. Ava's gaze moved slowly across the faces watching, not judging, not pleading, just seeing them, really seeing them. The way someone does when they understand that people are more than bystanders, that silence is not empty, it is a choice. The late sun dipped lower, casting longer lines of gold across the street, catching on the edge of a storefront window and reflecting back in fractured light, scattering across the scene in uneven patterns. Time felt slower now, stretched thin between each word, each breath. "You said you wanted to resolve this," Ava said, her voice steady, measured, drawing Reynolds' attention back to her without effort. "Then start by lowering your voice." It was not a demand. It was not even a correction. It was a reframing, simple, direct, impossible to ignore. Reynolds opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came immediately. That delay, that fraction of a second, was enough for everyone to notice. Enough for the balance to shift again. He closed his mouth, inhaled, then tried again, quieter this time, whether he meant to or not. "We are conducting an investigation," he said, each word more controlled now, less performative, more contained. Ava nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without conceding to it. "Then investigate," she replied. "But do not assume the answer before you ask the question." The words landed differently than before, not sharp, not cutting, but grounding, like something that anchored the moment in reality instead of authority. One of the agents glanced down at his tablet, scrolling quickly as if searching for confirmation, for something that would restore certainty, but the screen offered nothing immediate, just data that did not match the simplicity of the situation they had created. The bus engine idled behind them, a low, steady hum that seemed louder. Now in the quiet, the driver still watching, still waiting, his foot hovering near the brake as if unsure whether to move or stay. A light breeze passed again, lifting the edge of the little girl's hair, brushing against Ava's shoulder, soft, almost gentle, a contrast to the tension that had filled the space moments before. Ava's hand moved slightly, not reaching back, not turning, but enough that the child's grip shifted from uncertain to secure, a silent reassurance that did not need words. Reynolds noticed that too. He noticed everything now, the details he had missed at the start, the way Ava stood, the way she spoke, the way the moment responded to her instead of to him. That realization settled slowly, uncomfortable, persistent. "Who are you?" he asked, the question coming out before he could stop it, quieter than anything he had said so far, stripped of performance, stripped of authority, leaving only curiosity, and beneath that, something else he had not yet named. Ava held his gaze for a moment, her expression unchanged, calm, steady, but now there was a weight behind it, something that suggested the answer mattered more than he was prepared for. The street remained still, the crowd silent, the light fading inch by inch, and in that narrowing space between what he believed and what was unfolding in front of him, Reynolds waited. Reynolds did not expect the silence that followed his question to feel this heavy, like the air itself had weight, like every person standing on that sidewalk had leaned in without moving, waiting for something they did not yet understand but already felt was important. Ava did not answer right away. She did not rush to fill the space. Instead, she let the moment settle, let the quiet expand until it became impossible to ignore. The hum of the bus engine behind her seemed louder now, steady and constant, a reminder that time was still moving even if the scene had slowed to a near standstill. A car horn sounded faintly in the distance, then faded again, swallowed by the stillness that had taken over the block. Ava's eyes held Reynolds without challenge, without softness, simply steady, like someone who had already decided what mattered and what did not. The little girl's grip tightened slightly on her sleeve, her small fingers pressing into the fabric as if anchoring herself to something real. Ava shifted just enough to acknowledge it, a subtle adjustment that did not break eye contact, did not break focus. "You already decided who I am," Ava said finally, her voice quiet, even, carrying clearly without needing volume. "That is why you are asking the question now." The words landed with a clarity that did not accuse, but revealed. Reynolds felt it, the truth in it, the way it exposed the structure of the moment he had built without realizing it. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition, and that recognition unsettled him more than any resistance could have. "We are asking now," he replied, holding on to the edge of authority still within reach, "so answer it." The tone was firm, but it lacked the earlier certainty, like it was being held together rather than projected outward. Ava watched him for a second longer, then slowly, deliberately, she moved her hand. Not fast, not defensive, just a simple, controlled motion toward the inside of her jacket. The agents reacted instantly, not aggressively, but sharply, their posture tightening, attention snapping into place, the reflex of training overriding the uncertainty that had been building. "Hands where we can see them," one of them said quickly, the words coming out faster than before, less measured, more instinctive. Ava stopped her hand before it reached the pocket, holding it there in clear view, her fingers open, relaxed, showing no tension, no threat. "You asked," she said calmly. "I am answering." The distinction slowed them. just enough, creating a gap between reaction and action. Reynolds raised a hand slightly, signaling the others to hold, his eyes fixed on Ava's movement, tracking every detail now, aware that whatever came next mattered more than anything that had happened so far. The crowd shifted again, phones still raised, but quieter now, the energy different, less reactive, more focused, as if they understood they were witnessing something that could not be undone. Ava continued the motion, slow, deliberate, giving them time to see, to process, to choose how they would respond. Her fingers slipped into the inside pocket and emerged a second later, holding a small, worn leather wallet. Nothing dramatic, nothing threatening, just an object, ordinary in every way except for what it carried. She held it out slightly, not extending it fully, just enough for Reynolds to see without stepping closer, maintaining the space she had controlled from the beginning. "You should always ask first," she said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. "It changes what you see." Reynolds stepped forward half a pace, cautious now, not from fear, but from awareness, from the understanding that the moment had shifted beyond his initial assumptions. He reached out, slower than he normally would, and took the wallet from her hand. It felt heavier than expected, not in weight, but in implication. He opened it, the leather creasing softly, the sound small but sharp in the quiet. His eyes dropped to the identification inside, scanning automatically, trained to process quickly, to categorize, to confirm. And then he stopped. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just a pause, subtle but absolute, like a line had been drawn somewhere he had not anticipated. The light caught the edge of the card, reflecting upward into his eyes, and for a moment, the street, the crowd, the agents, everything around him seemed to fall just slightly out of focus as the meaning settled in, slow, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Reynolds did not breathe at first, not fully, not the way a body normally does when it moves through a moment, because something in the small rectangle of plastic resting inside that worn leather wallet had interrupted the rhythm he relied on, the automatic flow of recognition and response that had carried him through years of decisions without pause. The letters were clean, official, unmistakable, aligned in a format he knew too well to question, but the context did not fit, not here, not now, not with the assumptions he had already made. The light shifted again, a thin band of gold sliding across the surface of the card, catching on the embossed seal, reflecting just enough to force him to angle it slightly, to look again, slower this time, not scanning, but reading. Around him, the street remained suspended, the crowd quieter than before, phones still raised but unmoving, as if even recording had become secondary to witnessing. One of the agents leaned in just slightly, trying to catch a glimpse without stepping too close, his curiosity breaking through the structure he had been holding onto. But Reynolds did not lower the wallet, did not share the view, not yet, as if holding it alone might give him more time to understand what he was seeing. Ava stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, not pressing, not retreating, simply allowing the truth to settle at its own pace. The little girl behind her had gone completely still now, her hand still gripping Ava's sleeve, her eyes fixed on Reynolds, waiting in the same way everyone else was waiting, but for a different reason, not for authority to act, but for clarity to arrive. Reynolds swallowed, a small, almost imperceptible motion, but one that felt louder in his own body than anything he had said so far. His thumb shifted slightly along the edge of the card, tracing the line where name met designation, where identity met meaning, and something inside him began to rearrange, slowly, reluctantly, but undeniably. The word he had asked a moment ago, who, no longer felt like a question he controlled. It felt like something he had not been prepared to hear answered. A breeze moved through again, softer this time, lifting the edge of a loose receipt near the curb, carrying it a few inches before letting it fall, the small sound grounding the moment back into the physical world, reminding him that everything was still real, still happening, still moving forward whether he understood it or not. He closed the wallet halfway, then stopped, opening it again as if confirming the reality a second time would make it easier to accept, but it did not. It only made it clearer. Behind him, one of the agents shifted his weight, the faint creak of fabric and gear breaking the stillness just enough to draw attention back outward, But Reynolds did not turn. He could feel their eyes on him now, not just the crowd, but his own team, waiting for direction, waiting for certainty, waiting for the version of him that always knew what came next. For the first time, that version did not arrive immediately. Ava's voice came then, not interrupting, not pushing, simply present, steady as it had been from the beginning. "It looks different when you slow down," she said, the words soft, almost reflective, but carrying through the silence with precision. Reynolds lifted his eyes from the wallet to her face, and in that moment, he saw her fully, not as a subject, not as a situation, but as a person whose presence had never matched the assumption he had placed on it. The realization did not come with force. It came with weight, settling into place piece by piece, reshaping everything around it. He closed the wallet gently this time, the sound of leather folding quiet but final, and for a second, he did nothing, standing there between what he had believed and what now stood in front of him, knowing that whatever he said next would not just define the moment, but reveal who he had been in it all along. Reynolds' fingers tightened slightly around the closed wallet, not in resistance, but in hesitation, as if the object itself carried more weight now than it had a moment ago, as if returning it meant acknowledging something he could not undo. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, no longer uncertain, no longer suspended, but settled, like a truth had already arrived and was simply waiting to be recognized out loud. One of the agents behind him shifted closer, unable to hold back any longer. "Sir," he asked quietly, the single word carrying more than a question, carrying expectation, direction, and the unspoken need for clarity. Reynolds did not answer immediately. His eyes stayed on Ava, studying her again, but now without assumption, without the filter that had shaped every second before this. He saw the details differently now, the stillness that was not passive, the calm that was not compliance, the awareness that had never once wavered. "You could have said something earlier," he said finally, his voice lower than before, stripped of command, almost reflective, as if he were speaking to himself as much as to her. Ava did not react to the statement the way he expected. She did not correct him. She did not challenge him. She simply held his gaze, steady and clear. "I did," she replied, her voice calm, unchanged. "You just were not listening." The words did not strike him as sharp. They settled, quiet and heavy, filling the space where certainty had once been. Behind them, the city began to return in small pieces, a distant engine accelerating, a pedestrian crossing signal beeping softly at the corner, the world continuing as it always did, even as something inside this moment had shifted completely. Reynolds exhaled slowly, the breath deeper now, more grounded, like he was finally catching up to where the situation had already moved. He extended the wallet back toward her, his motion careful, deliberate, no longer transactional, but acknowledging. Ava took it without hesitation, her fingers closing around it with the same steady control she had shown from the beginning, and slipped it back into her jacket without breaking eye contact. The movement was simple, ordinary, but it marked a line that had been crossed and could not be recrossed. One of the agents glanced between them, confusion written plainly across his face. "Sir, what is going on?" he asked, louder this time, the tension breaking through his voice. Reynolds did not look at him right away. His focus remained on Ava for a moment longer, as if confirming something final, something that did not need to be spoken but needed to be understood. Then he turned slightly, just enough for his voice to carry to his team. "Stand down," he said. The words were quiet, but they landed with more force than anything he had said all afternoon. The agents froze for a second, processing, then slowly, one by one, their posture shifted, not relaxed, but recalibrated, stepping back just enough to create space where there had been none before. The crowd reacted in a low ripple, whispers replacing silence, phones lowering slightly as the tension eased, though the attention remained. Ava did not move immediately. She stayed where she was, the little girl, still at her side, the connection between them unchanged, grounded in something that had never depended on the authority surrounding them. Reynolds looked back at her, his expression no longer hard, no longer fixed, but unsettled in a quieter way, like someone who had just seen a version of the world he had not prepared for. "This was not supposed to happen like this," he said, not as an excuse, not as a defense, but as a recognition of the gap between expectation and reality. Ava's response came without delay, just as steady as before. "It rarely does," she said. The simplicity of it held more weight than anything else that had been said. The breeze moved again, softer now, carrying through the open space that had been created, brushing past uniforms, past the bus, past the edges of the moment as it began to release its hold. Reynolds nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, but enough to signal that something had shifted within him, something he could not fully name yet, but could not ignore anymore. And for the first time since the moment began, he did not try to control what came next. The space that had been tight with tension a moment ago now felt open in a way that made every movement more visible, more deliberate, like the entire street had shifted from confrontation to observation without anyone announcing it. Ava let her shoulders settle, not in relief, but in completion, as if something she had been holding steady could finally rest without collapsing. The little girl's grip on her sleeve loosened just slightly, not because the need was gone, but because the fear had changed shape, softened into something that could be managed. Ava glanced down at her for the first time since the moment had turned, her expression gentle now, the calm still there, but warmer, more human, less guarded. "You are okay," she said quietly. The words simple, meant only for the child, but they carried outward, reaching the edges of the crowd in a way that shifted the energy even further. The girl nodded, small and quick, her shoulders dropping a fraction, her breath finally steadying. Behind them, the bus driver exhaled audibly, a long breath he had been holding without. Realizing it, and leaned back into his seat, one hand tapping lightly against the steering wheel as if grounding himself again in routine. Reynolds watched all of it, not as someone directing the scene anymore, but as someone inside it, experiencing the consequences of what had unfolded. He ran a hand briefly along the edge of his vest, a habitual motion that usually brought reassurance, but now felt different, like it belonged to a version of himself that had not fully caught up yet. "Ma'am," one of the agents said cautiously, his tone no longer sharp, no longer commanding, but uncertain, searching for footing. We were responding to a report." The sentence trailed slightly, lacking the confidence it would have carried earlier, as if even he recognized that the explanation did not hold the same weight anymore. Ava looked at him then, not dismissive, not confrontational, just attentive, acknowledging the effort behind the words. "Then respond to what is real," she said, her voice even, steady. "Not what you expect to find." The agent nodded without thinking, the response automatic, as if the clarity of her statement bypassed resistance entirely. Reynolds shifted his weight, the movement subtle, but it marked a transition, from holding authority to reconsidering it. "We will review the report," he said, more to his team than to her, his tone measured, deliberate, rebuilding structure in a different way now, one that accounted for what had just happened instead of ignoring it. The agents exchanged brief glances, then nodded, their posture adjusting again, not rigid, not defensive, but recalibrated to something quieter, more aware. Around them, the crowd began to move again, slowly at first, people lowering their phones, stepping back into their own lives, though many still looked over their shoulders, carrying the moment with them as they left. Ava felt the shift too, the release of attention, the return of ordinary motion, but she did not rush to leave. She turned slightly, positioning herself so the little girl was no longer behind her, but beside her, equal, visible, no longer hidden by the tension that had defined the last few minutes. "Where are you headed?" Ava asked softly. The girl hesitated, then pointed toward the bus, her voice barely above a whisper. "Home." Ava nodded once, a small, affirming gesture. "Then let us make sure you get there," she said. The simplicity of it grounded everything, brought the moment back to its core, to care, to presence, to something that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with humanity. Reynolds watched as Ava guided the girl a few steps forward, not leading, not pulling, just walking with her, and something in that image stayed with him longer than anything else that had happened. Not the badge, not the realization, but the choice she had made from the very beginning, to protect first, to respond second, to hold steady even when the world around her had not. He drew in a slow breath, deeper than before, and for the first time, It felt like he understood what had been missing, not in her, but in himself. The bus doors folded open with a soft hydraulic sigh, the sound gentle, almost understated, as if the world itself had decided to move forward without drawing attention to the moment that had just passed. Ava paused at the bottom step, giving the little girl space to go first, her hand hovering just behind her shoulder, not touching, but close enough to be felt. The girl glanced back once, her eyes searching Ava's face, and Ava gave a small nod, steady and reassuring, the kind that did not promise anything grand, only that she would not be alone in the next step. The girl climbed aboard, her backpack shifting slightly against her shoulders, and disappeared into the quiet interior of the bus. Ava followed a moment later, her movement calm, unhurried, like everything she had done from the beginning. The driver met her eyes briefly, something unspoken passing between them, a recognition, a quiet respect, and then he nodded and turned his focus back to the road ahead. The doors closed with a muted click, sealing the moment behind them, and the bus eased forward into the flow of traffic, its engine blending into the steady rhythm of the city. On the sidewalk, Reynolds remained where he was, his stance no longer rigid, no longer defined by command, but still, as if moving too quickly would break something he was still trying to understand. The agents around him had already begun to disperse slightly, adjusting their positions, checking equipment, speaking in lower tones, their voices no longer carrying across the street, no longer demanding attention. The crowd had thinned, people returning to their routines, but not entirely unchanged, their glances lingering a second longer than usual, their steps slightly slower, as if each of them carried a piece of what they had witnessed. Reynolds watched the bus until it turned the corner and disappeared from view, the reflection of its windows catching the last light of the sun before fading into the distance. He exhaled slowly, the breath long and deliberate, his hand dropping from his vest to his side, the familiar weight of his role feeling different now, not gone, but altered in a way that could not be reversed. The street felt quieter than before, not empty, but settled, like something had resolved without needing to be declared. A loose piece of paper drifted across the pavement, caught briefly against the curb before lifting again and moving on, carried by a breeze that had no destination, only motion. Reynolds looked down at his hands for a moment, as if expecting to see something different, something changed, but they were the same, steady, capable, trained, and yet they felt heavier, not from what they had done, but from what they had nearly done without question. He lifted his gaze again, scanning the street not for control, but for understanding, seeing the same buildings, the same sidewalks, the same passing cars, but noticing the spaces between them, the details he had overlooked before. One of his agents approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away, waiting for direction that did not come immediately. Reynolds did not turn to him right away. Instead, he watched the light shift along the edge of a storefront window, the reflection softening as the sun dipped lower, the day moving toward evening without hesitation. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been at any point before, not lacking authority, but reshaped by something deeper. "Next time," he said, not looking at the agent, not looking at anyone in particular, "we start by asking." The words were simple, but they carried weight, not as a command, but as a correction, a line drawn not in the street, but within himself. The agent nodded slowly, understanding more than the words themselves, sensing the shift even if he could not fully define it. The breeze moved again, brushing lightly against their uniforms, against the edges of the moment as it faded into memory. Reynolds stood there a second longer, then turned and walked back toward his vehicle, not with the same certainty he had arrived with, but with something quieter, something steadier, something that did not need to prove itself. Behind him, the street continued, cars passing, footsteps echoing, voices rising and falling, life moving forward as it always did. But somewhere within it, something had changed.